from his people. Amen. God is good. I thank God for him, for all that he does in and through his people. Amen. Bless God for you who are here this morning. I would like to invite your attention this morning to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27. As you turn to that. One of the things I try to do on the third Sunday, of course, is try to lift up some aspect of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And trying to stay with that same thing. So this morning, Matthew chapter 27, and when you have found that, we of course invite you to stand with us as we read from God's Word. And we're going to jump around just a little bit in this chapter, but I'll make sure that you stay with us. Beginning at verse 1 in chapter 27 of the Gospel of Matthew, it says here that when the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Now turn with me to verse 24 in that same chapter. So they have taken him to Pilate. And when Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Then answered all the people and said, his blood be on us and on our children. Then released he Barabbas unto them. And when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers. And they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe. And when they had planted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him, and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spit upon him, and took the reed, and smote him on the head. And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe off him, and put his own raiment on him, and led him away to crucify him. These are the words of the Lord. And so this morning, I want us to focus on this crucifixion scene and all that we just read that went into this crucifixion, the horror, all of the drama that goes into a crucifixion. Crucifixion was the most horrible form of punishment, and it was a punishment that was reserved only for the vilest of criminals. So not every criminal who was put to death would be crucified. It was only for those whom Pilate deemed to be the vilest of criminals. And so Jesus himself, being considered to be a malefactor, he was crucified. And part of that crucifixion, as we just read, was to strip him of all his clothing. And after all that he had endured, where they had beat him with the reed, where they had spit upon him, where they had made a mockery of him, then the most dramatic moment of all came. And that was the moment where they would lay him down on the cross. Once he was laid on the cross, they would stretch out his arms along the cross beams. And they would open the palms of his hands, and at the center of his open palm, they took a huge iron nail and drove that nail all the way, not only through his hands, but into and through the wooden beam. Then, after nailing both hands to the cross beams, they took his feet, and they placed one upon the other. And they took yet again a huge iron nail, and they drove that nail through his feet tearing the bones and the flesh. Also at the lower part of the cross was a little small wooden projection. And the purpose of that was so that the person being crucified could support their weight of their body in some fashion. But yet even that proved to be agonizing. And then after nailing him to the cross, they lifted up that cross and allowed it to drop down into the hole in which he was now to be fixed firmly in the ground. And so Jesus, by crucifixion, would suffer dizziness, cramps, thirst, starvation, sleeplessness, traumatic fever, and long continuous torment. And this very unnatural position made every movement, every breath painful. His veins had been lacerated. His tendons had been crushed, and they just throbbed with anguish. His wounds became inflamed, and gradually his wounds became gangrene. His arteries were swollen, particularly those in his head and in his stomach because of the surcharged blood. And such was the death to which Jesus had been condemned to. I'm trying to paint a picture here this morning. We've kind of taken away some of the horror of the crucifixion, and it's kind of become more of a story and less of what really happened that day. I hope you heard as I went through that they actually used 3 nails, one in each palm and one through his feet. And we're going to talk soon because, in fact, there was a 4th nail. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. The 4 nails that changed you and I forever. The 4 nails that changed you and I forever. As we have read in Matthew 27, this tells of the culmination, not just of the ministry of Jesus Christ, but we now sit at the zenith of God's love and God's mercy. Because what happened on Calvary that day, outside the city of Jerusalem, would forever not only change history, but it would forever change humanity. This same Jesus who hung on this cross, no one had ever loved so much. No one had ever sacrificed so much. No one had ever accomplished so much as this man Jesus, who before this day, before being nailed to this cross, had healed the sick. He fed the hungry. He raised the dead. He taught God's love. And he loved the unlovable, and he sought out the lost. This malefactor hanging on the cross. And yet, on that day, 4 nails would forever change how God ministers to a lost and dying world. Those 4 nails changed that ministry that day forever. Because now we see what we call the earthly ministry of Jesus Christ coming to a close. And each nail that drives into his flesh beckons us to take up where he left off. That's what we see in the cross. We see the beginning of our ministry. We have been called to go and to do that which Jesus had started. It didn't end at the cross. The ministry of reconciliation was only beginning. We look at the first nail. Those first 2 nails that were placed in his hand. They pierced the hands of the one who healed the leper. Pierced the hands of the one who touched the man and caused him who was blind from birth to have sight. These hands have healed the lame. Hands that have fed thousands from a few loaves and fish, of bread and fish. These same hands that had done so much were now nailed to a criminal's cross. But Hebrews chapter 12 verse 2 tells us that he is no longer on the cross, but he is now seated at the right hand of the Father in glory. And since Jesus, his earthly ministry is concluded, and he is no longer here, therefore, who is going to do the work that Jesus began? He didn't take the work back to glory. He left the work of the ministry here on earth to the church. He didn't take it back with him. We are now the hands of Jesus Christ. We, the body of Jesus Christ, we are called by God to touch the sick now. We are to lay hands on the hurting and those who are dying. We are called to restore hope to the hopeless. We are the ones who are to beckon the little children to come unto him. Our hands are now called to the work of ministry. For far too long, the church has lost sight of what this cross was calling us to do. It wasn't calling us to a lack of luxury, to just sit back and wait for the blessings to pour out. These are the hands that are to touch and to heal and to bless. We are the hands of Jesus Christ. That's what God left. And every time you see the cross, you see the ministry, the work that he left for you and for me. Christ calls us to do so much more. He calls the church to roll up his sleeves and get his hands dirty during the work of ministry. We are to leave the stained glass buildings in order to reach lives that have been stained by sin. We ought to get out of our comfort zones and leave the pews and reach out into the streets and lovingly share this message of hope, this message of God's love and God's mercy. We are called to do the work of Jesus Christ. We are called to be the hands of Jesus. Our hands are not on the cross. These hands, our hands, are the only hands now that he has to continue the work of the earthly ministry. We have been called to help the needy. We have been called to help those that are hurting. We have been called to minister to the unsaved. Amen. These hands, not the ones on the cross, but the hands that God has given to us. It is these hands that are to do the work while it is still day. These hands. So when I see the cross, I look at my hands. These hands that God has given to me. They took the third nail and they put that nail into his feet. One nail driven through his feet stopped his earthly ministry, stopped him from going where God would lead him to do his Father's will. He could no longer go here, and no longer could he must need go through those places that God had called him to reveal himself to be the Christ. But he was always reminded that he came to seek and to save that which had been lost. And so now he calls me. He said, Clyde, look at your feet. Look at your feet. Oh yeah, mine were attached to the cross. I can't go. But I told you to go. And as you go, you do that which I have already set before you. You go to the needy. You go to the hurting. You go to the lost. See, you can't send Jesus anymore because he's on the cross. We can't sit there in our comfort zone and say, Lord, go by the hospital. He said, you go. And as you go, stop by the hospital, stop by the nursing home, you stop by the woods, you minister to those who are hurting and distressed. How beautiful are the feet of those who go. This is not a ministry to sit and just wait on Jesus. He's reminding us that he expects us as followers. He said, Clyde, I told you to take this gospel. And as you go with this gospel, I want you to go to all nations. He says, I want you to take this gospel and make disciples. And as you go, I want you to baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. And wherever you go, because I told you that you ought to go to the uttermost, to the ends of the earth. I want you to go in my steps. I want you to now to walk in the steps of Jesus. I want you to be ready. I want you to be willing to endure for my sake, for the gospel's sake, for the kingdom's sake. You are the one to preach the gospel of peace. You now bring glad tidings of good joy. It now sits on the church. We are the feet. These feet, the songwriter said, these feet are made for walking. These feet are made for walking. Walking in the power and authority of Jesus Christ. Don't pray to send Jesus anywhere, but pray that he will give you the strength and the mind to become the feet of Jesus. So if Jesus is going anywhere, it's because you take it. You become the mode of transportation for Jesus. So if he's going to get to Centera, it's because you went to Centera. If he's going to minister there at Streetlight, it's because you went to Streetlight. You got to stop praying for Jesus to stop by here. My Bible says Jesus is seated. And that's the posture he will remain in until he comes back. You can't send Jesus. You can't pray Jesus nowhere. But he's calling me. And all he gave me earlier was a 2-letter word. And that means get up and move from where you are in Greek, in Hebrew, Latin, and English. Go means go. You can't sit here and convince Jesus that you are his feet and that you are prepared to do the work of ministry. Oh, I hope somebody is getting this. I'm trying to make us all a little uncomfortable so that when you look at the cross, you won't ever see the cross the same ever again. You won't see it as something to hang around your neck, but you'll see it as a commandment to go. They put nails in him. He couldn't go anymore. He couldn't even come down. But he looked at us from that cross and he said, go. You go. You go. And as you go, I want you to do all that you have seen me do before you. Even greater. We are the hand. We are the feet. We are the ones who have to visit the sick. We are the ones to take the gospel to our neighbors. We are the ones to bring hope to those who are seeking hope. And so I just say simply, if Jesus is your Lord, then you are called to be his. And I'll let you decide whether or not you are his people. So if you don't go, then the evidence speaks against you that you are not his people. The last nail. The last nail. That last nail was used to put a placard above his head. Yeah. That was the fourth nail. And they put it up there as a means to mock him. They meant it to be a very cruel joke. This man whom the Pharisees feared as king of the Jews. So Pilate wrote in Greek, in Hebrew, and Latin, so that every person could understand plainly that this man is the king of the Jews. Oh, it angered them. Take that thing down. He's not my king. But what did Pilate say? What I have written, I have written. So let it be written, so let it be done. And with that, the soldiers put a nail in that placard. It was so ironic that Pilate's statement was absolutely true. Jesus of Nazareth, the King. Jesus of Nazareth, the King. And think about this for a moment now. This is times when I kind of want to put my head down and I feel bad. I don't want to look up at God in those moments because I'm kind of shaking myself. That this man hanging on the cross, this immortal one, clothed in flesh, deserved to be born in a palace. But yet he was born in a stable. It makes me feel bad. He deserved a throne. But instead, they gave him a cross. And I want to put my head down because I want to believe in my heart, had I been there, I would have fought for Jesus. But God whispers in my ear. He said, no, Clyde, you too would have shouted, crucify him. So I put my head down. Jesus, who was crucified, they call him a king. But I tell you, Jesus is the king. How do I know that Jesus is the king? Because the Bible records this. Wherefore God hath exalted him and given him a name above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the